This is Earl with Insight. Dr. Harold Blake Walker sent me something that I enjoyed tremendously, and I think you'll enjoy it too. He wrote, "We live by faith, or we do not live at all. Either we venture or we vegetate. If we venture, we do so by faith, simply because we cannot know the end of anything at its beginning. We risk marriage on faith, or we stay single. We prepare for a profession by faith, or we give up before we start. By faith we move mountains or opposition, or we're stopped by molehills." Faith, however, is not often tranquil and steady. It ebbs and flows like the tides of the restless sea. Normally, like Browning's Bishop, we're forever exchanging a life of doubt diversified by faith for one of faith diversified by doubt. Yesterday we began the day with confident hope, with trust in its promise. Last night, perhaps after a trying and troublesome day, we were beset by doubt and anxiety. We grope and fumble in search of certainty, wishing we could escape the doubts that haunt us. The peril is that we shall cease groping on through our doubts and live only on our negations. What we need, you and I, is faith strong enough to bear the burden of our doubts. No man ever drilled an oil well without being troubled by misgivings as the drill chewed downward toward producing structures. But only a fool would cease drilling halfway to the hoped-for pool. It was William Morris, the painter, who wrote, "I tell you it's no joke to paint a portrait. Into the painting of every picture that is worth anything there comes a period of doubt and despair. The artist, however, goes on with his work, beyond his doubt, to creative achievement. Faith enough to carry our doubts. It is enough. Perhaps it's all we can manage when fears assail and doubts annoy. Maybe we can do no more than grope on through our uncertainties, pursuing the enterprises of our lives in the grim trust that the end will justify the struggle. If, despite our gnawing doubts, we can muster faith enough to take a single step on the road to where we're going, we're on the way to creative achievement. Every triumph of the human spirit begins with one step taken in faith. The single step is the small handle to great matters. No man or woman ever won a worthy triumph without faith to keep on and on, always able to last at least 5 minutes longer. There is one further thing to be said, namely that worthy triumphs cannot be won without faith enough to maintain our integrity. One of the ultimate tests of faith is our capacity to go on believing that somehow the right is the right, even when right is on the scaffold and wrong seems to be on the throne. All of the great ventures of our lives require faith enough to bear the burden of our doubts so that we're able to take the first step in the direction that we wish to go. Enough of faith to keep on going through struggle and strain and to maintain integrity on the way. Faith, as the ancient seer wrote, is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And we need to exchange a life of doubt diversified by faith for one of faith diversified by doubt. In Anthony Trollope's autobiography, he points out that he was able to turn out an almost unbelievable amount of work and still have all the fun and enjoyment he wanted, the company of good friends, card games, and hunting twice a week, along with a 6-week vacation every year. As he himself put it, few men, I think, ever lived a fuller life, and I attribute the power of doing this altogether to the virtue of early hours. It was my practice to be at my table every morning at 5:30 a.m. An old groom, whose business it was to call me, and to whom I paid £5 a year extra for the duty, allowed himself no mercy. During all those years at Waltham Cross, he was never once late with the coffee which it was his duty to bring me. I do not know that I ought not to feel that I owe more to him than to anyone else for the success I've had. By beginning at that hour, I could complete my literary work before I dressed for breakfast. Here we're amazed at the amount of work that this man managed to produce, and he wrote some 50 novels, and find that he was able to do every bit of it before breakfast. There's a very valuable lesson there. Few people realize the enormous cumulative effect of a small amount of time utilized on a regular basis. And before we pass this by, let me emphasize that regular basis business. It seems that most people do things by fits and starts, whether it's dieting or exercising or planning and fulfilling worthwhile goals. This is perfectly human. We're not machines. But as Anthony Trollope indicated in his autobiography, he owed a large part of his success to the man who woke him up every morning at 5:30 with a cup of coffee. By 7:30 every morning, he had put in 2 hours of solid work. By 9:30, when most people are just getting started, he was probably through writing for the day. If someone should steal $10 from us, it might take us days to get over it. Yet how much priceless time do we steal from ourselves? Someone once calculated that the average person is given about 500,000 hours, give or take 100,000 or so, and it's up to each of us to determine what his time on earth is worth in whatever values he feels are important to him. But if we don't get what we want out of this life, it's seldom because we're not given enough time for it. We have more than enough time. As with most everything else, it's what we choose to do with it that makes all the difference. There are few things a person could want that he could not manage to get for himself with 2 or 3 hours of daily time systematically and practically put to use for a given number of months or years. What he does with his time will, of course, depend on the person. He can do whatever he most wants to do toward the end he most wants to achieve. For one, it could be a course of study, or reading, or writing, or planning, or whatever. But it's something to think about. Reading the autobiographies of outstanding persons can stir our creative discontent. Someone wrote, "Each moment as it passes is the meeting place of 2 eternities." It would very probably be a very good thing if we took a long, serious look at the way we spend our time. Dr. Erwin Ross, a psychologist, author, and consultant on personnel problems, reports that no matter how you cut it, sugarcoat it, or rationalize it, there are only 4 reasons why people get fired. Learn them, and you'll live to be an oil portrait in a boardroom. A person can get fired only if he, 1, is a round organization person in a square corporate hole, 2, works at a job that gives him no satisfaction, 3, neglects his personal relationships with associates, and 4, keeps his nose so close to the grindstone he forgets the purpose of his work. Now let's look at them in order. Unless you know what sort of person you are, it's hard to know if you fit in your organization. Are you big company minded, or does the more intimate, less complicated small organization appeal to you? Do you want rapid promotion, strong competition, or are you looking for security and lack of pressure? One top-notch controller who had built a reputation as a competent executive in the public utilities field took a whopping offer from an automobile manufacturer. He threw his solid but slow skills into the fast world of car manufacturing and soon found himself outdistanced. He simply could not get used to making what he called snap judgments on matters he'd have mulled over for a couple of weeks in his old job. So he was a round peg in a square hole. Second, job dissatisfaction. Of all the rules of business life, the sternest is, don't take the first job you find. Too many people, panicked by the prospect of unemployment or eager to make a change, forget that getting a job isn't difficult. Any well-organized self-promotion campaign will produce plenty of job offers. Getting the right job, however, can be difficult. Remember that you're looking for more than just work. You're developing a career. As to neglecting personal relationships, there's an old corporate adage that points out that the higher up on the pole the monkey climbs, the more he exposes the seat of his pants. Organizational politics exist everywhere. There's always a race going on to win top management control, and for place and show as well. Every increase of authority for one person creates jealousy and suspicion among some of the others. In the power politics of big organizations, no holds are barred. Having lots of friends and knowing how to work with them spells safety for you when throats are being cut, says Dr. Ross, and he gives 5 don'ts. Don't threaten the position of old-timers in the company by being too bright, too aggressive, and too often right in management meetings. Don't take sides in ongoing company feuds. Don't knock the ideas that others advance and then expect them to back yours. Build friendships through helping others get their ideas across. Don't get too far in front of the people you're trying to lead. And don't misjudge co-workers. There may be reasons why they're where they are and you where you are. And finally, reason number 4. Have you ever said, the only way to get something done right is to do it myself? Well, that's the swan song of many an executive career. Modern industry is far too complex for the person who can't develop competent assistants to share his load, delegate, and let people grow. And don't be too tough. You're a long way from perfect, too. Lin Yutang, the famous Chinese philosopher, wrote, "We do not know a nation until we know its pleasures of life, just as we do not know a man until we know how he spends his leisure. It is when a man ceases to do the things he has to do and does the things he likes to do that the character is revealed. It's when the repressions of society and business are gone, and when the goads of money and fame and ambition are lifted, and a man's spirit wanders where it listeth, that we see the inner man, his real self." Had you ever thought much about that? Your leisure gives you away. I used to know a man who was head of a very large commercial empire. Beginning with nothing but ambition, he became a multimillionaire and finally retired as head of his far-flung company. He bought a large and magnificent yacht with which to cruise the world. And do you know what he did with his free time? He read salacious paperbacks and got falling down drunk and had to be carried unconscious to bed every night. He's dead now. His leisure gave him away. There was nothing there, just nothing at all. He was a one-idea man. Once he was away from that idea, he was a lost child in the wilderness. He didn't enjoy his yacht or his time. Travel meant nothing to him. He was a pitiful, unhappy cipher. His millions, which could have given him access to the whole world, were worthless to him. The thing that's always bothered me is how a human being can live for 30 or 40 or 50 years and find no interest, no charm and excitement in the world. Talk about wearing blinders. I guess it has to do with the way a person looks at life. If it's nothing more to him than getting through one day after another as best he can, that's one thing. But if he's searching for meaning, well, that's something else. It doesn't mean he'll find it, but the search, the journey itself, can be filled with interest and excitement. When FDR first took office as President of the United States, one of his first acts was to call on the Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Oliver Wendell Holmes. He was admitted to the old jurist's chambers and found him reading Plato. Justice Holmes was in his 90s. "Why are you reading Plato, Mr. Justice?" the President asked. "To improve my mind, Mr. President," the great judge replied. "To improve my mind. What do you do with your leisure time? It's a good idea to examine carefully this important segment of your life. It exposes the real person, but not the finished person. We can change. We can, like Justice Holmes, still be growing and improving our minds at 92. I don't mean we need to read Plato, although it's an excellent idea, but to find fulfillment, meaning, and interest, we need to grow towards something. When we stop growing, like my millionaire friend with a big yacht, we get sick and die. We may stick around a few more years and go through the motions, but for all practical purposes, we've really ceased to live. We do not know a man until we know how he spends his leisure. It is when a man ceases to do the things he has to do and does the things he likes to do that the character is revealed. It is then we see the inner man, his real self. I know a woman who has a loud, shrill, nerve-shattering voice. When she laughs, it's an ear-splitting, high-pitched shriek that you'd swear would break a beer bottle at 50 feet. Compared to her voice, the sound of fingernails being dragged across a blackboard is as the cooing of a mourning dove. The late Edward R. Murrow said, "A voice is so much a part of a person that it gives clues to his mood, his poise, his background, his whole personality. It can make countless impressions for you every hour of every working day. If it's the right kind of voice, it will most assuredly encourage others to work with you." A department store chain executive tells of one big Midwestern store that ran an extensive Operation Telephone project. Everybody deliberately sought to project a warm, friendly telephone voice. The result? Business went up more than 25%, and words of praise poured in. Our voice is our advertising. It tells the world who we are and what we are, and by the care with which we use it, it tells others what we think of them. Our voice can offend people not only by what we say, but the way we say it. Neither our words nor our laughter should go far beyond the people we're talking to. If it makes other people stop and turn their heads, it's offensive. It shows a lack of good manners, what people used to call poor breeding, which is probably one of the world's most devastating comments. Someone once said that a person's brain can be likened to a wagon. The lighter the load, the noisier it becomes. And the words we use are important. Words are servants. We're all verbal creatures. Trouble is, we don't use the thousands and thousands of fine, bright, powerful words we all have at our command. Instead, we use only a few, with the result that what we say often lacks color and clarity, warmth, enthusiasm, excitement. H. Phelps Gates wrote, "There's strength and force in short words, words that blast and boom, throb and thump, hiss and buzz and zoom. There's grace and charm in short words, too, in words like lull and hush and purr. There are short, lush words like dank, muck, and drench, and short, dry ones like crisp, parch, and husk. There are words that work hard at their job, that pry and push, that slash and hack, that cut and clip, that chip and saw. Scan the best sales jobs in print. You'll find them rich in short words that tease the taste, make glad the eye, whet the nose, and please the ear. There's nip, twang, bite, and tang in short sales words. They're sweet, sour, tart, or dry as need be. There are words you can hear like the swish of silk, soft words with the feel of swan's down, words with a smell like musk, smoke, cheese, mint, and rose, all of them sales tools. Our voices and our words make or lose the sale for us, and every time we speak, we're selling. Our words and the sound of our voices are so familiar to us that we take them for granted, but they're too important to be taken for granted. Your voice and your words are your advertising. Here's a question for you. How good are you at solving your own problems? If you'll think about it a moment, you'll realize that living well and successfully is really a matter of being able to solve or overcome the problems that are as much a part of living as breathing. But of one thing you can be sure. Few people realize that they have within themselves far more problem-solving potential than they ever use. Now, let's say you have a problem. Chances are you have several problems. The first thing to remember is that to solve a problem, it must be defined, and that we should take only one problem at a time. So take your biggest problem, define it, sit down, and on a sheet of paper write as complete a description of the problem as you can. Just spelling it out has a way of diminishing it. We're most afraid of what we can't see. When we see our problem written out, it never looks quite as tough. The next step is to break down the problem into details, and don't confuse facts with opinions. Make sure you know what you're talking about, and that the problem is as real as you think it is. Now begin to list possible solutions. Write down as many possible solutions as you can think of, no matter how crazy they may appear. Then talk the problem through with someone you admire and whose opinion you respect. If this doesn't result in the solving of the problem, begin to collect data about it as much as you possibly can. Study everything you can lay your hands on that pertains to this particular problem. And all the time know that the problem has a solution and that you're perfectly capable of finding it. Then, just before you go to sleep at night, read over the data you've collected about the problem or notes you've written from it, and go over in your mind the list of possible solutions that you made earlier. Then relax. Let your mind go to work on it, not your conscious mind, but your subconscious or unconscious mind. Set your alarm clock to wake you an hour earlier than you usually get up. Get up, get yourself a cup of coffee, sit down to a sheet of paper, and try to come up with 20 new ideas that might solve that problem. By doing this, by turning the problem over and over in your mind and letting it incubate while you're asleep and while you're going about your daily work, one fine day when you least expect it, while you're taking a shower or on the way to work or just sitting around the house, the solution will burst into your mind. Or rather, it will slip in quietly and without fanfare, and you'll be startled that the problem is solved. You'll usually find that the solution is so common sense, so plain, so simple and perfect, that you'll wonder why you didn't think of it before. But there's one secret to success in this sort of thing that is vitally important. Whenever you think of your problem, think of it always as only waiting to be solved, and know that you will get the solution. Don't worry about the problem or be afraid of it. This will only keep you awake, interfere with your digestion, and in general run you down. Face your problem with faith, and bend every effort to solve it, and solve it you will. Then go on to the next one. Each time you solve a new problem, the solution to the next one will be just that much easier. Each of us has a tendency to underestimate his own abilities. We should realize that we have, deep within ourselves, a reservoir of genius that can be tapped if we'll just dig deeply enough. For 2 hours one day, I sat completely enthralled before my television. It was one of the most enjoyable 2 hours I've ever spent. It was a special performance called Rhapsody in Song, the music of George Gershwin, performed by the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra under the direction of Thomas Mahalik. I heard the overture from Girl Crazy, then the piano concerto in F major, followed by Gershwin's incredible Rhapsody in Blue, performed by people who were very obviously in love with what they were doing that day. Rhapsody in Blue has been called a national American treasure, and that's exactly what it is, because that's what George Gershwin was, a national treasure indeed, one of the most significant of U.S. composers. After Rhapsody in Blue, and I was wondering what they would do for an encore, they introduced Sarah Vaughan, whose voice is another national treasure, and her trio, who began to work with the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra to do songs by Gershwin. Summertime. It ain't necessarily so, but not for me. Our love is here to stay. Embraceable you, someone to watch over me, the man I love. A foggy day. Fascinating rhythm. Strike up the band. They can't take that away from me. Swonderful. Swanee. It went on public television, and I found there were tears in my eyes as I listened to such surpassing talent perform such surpassing music. The music of George Gershwin fits no category. It's in a special category of its own, and unlike anything else ever done. When you hear a great symphony orchestra play Rhapsody in Blue, something happens to you that's different from anything else. Gershwin had the genius to touch us in a certain way, a very moving and powerful way that no one else ever had, and his music is just another way of spelling America. It's so American you can hear and taste and smell the country in it, especially the city. I'd already had albums of Gershwin's music, and I'd listened to his music when I was overseas in the war, in a little room where a few of us used to gather and listen to great music. The interesting thing about George Gershwin's music is that, as I said before, it fits no previous category. It isn't classical music, but it's classic. And his great popular tunes with lyrics by his brother Ira, they fit a special category too, along with perhaps the music of Cole Porter, a composer Gershwin admired very much. But isn't it great when such talent finds the freedom of expression he found here in the United States to develop a new genre, a new sound, and a new kind of music? Gershwin, by the way, was the son of Russian Jewish immigrants. At the age of 12, he began to study the piano. Long after he became a successful composer, he continued to broaden his compositional technique, studying with other composers. He was loved here and still is, and his music is still played and enjoyed all over the world. Did you ever hear Oscar Levant play Rhapsody in Blue? That was something. And you can still get it on records or cassettes, I'm sure. Paul Whiteman used to do a pretty good job of it, too. The Greek dramatist Menander said, "Art is man's refuge from adversity." Peter Ouspensky, the Russian philosopher, said, "Art is the communication of ecstasy." And author Joseph Conrad referred to the magic suggestiveness of music and called music the art of arts. I'll go along with that. One of the human being's favorite pastimes seems to be talking about his missed opportunities. It usually goes something like this. You know, I've lived here for 30 years. 30 years ago, I could have bought that piece of property where that new 60-story building is for a song. It was just an old empty lot filled with trash out at the end of town. Who would have thought that this growth would have taken place? I remember during my childhood in Southern California at the time of the Great Depression when I could have bought most of downtown Los Angeles for what I recently paid for a home. But there are a few snags to taking advantage of such astounding opportunities. I wasn't in the real estate business. I didn't know anything about it, and I had no idea as to what the future held. And even if I had, in those days, I thought I was a big success when I could scrape together enough money for a hamburger and a malted milk or the corner movie. I sold newspapers and worked in an ice cream store to do that. But the main reason why most of us don't take advantage of the opportunities by which we're daily surrounded is because most of us don't know where we want to go or how we want to get there. The old Roman Seneca once said, "When a person does not know what harbor he's making for, no wind is the right wind." In order to spot and seize an opportunity, or even to recognize an opportunity, we have to know where we're going, what it is we want to do and accomplish. To a person who wants to make his fortune in real estate, an empty lot is not an empty lot. It's the first floor of a skyscraper or the site of something. Other people without such plans don't even see it. It's just a place to toss your chewing gum. Then, too, people have a tendency to think of opportunities only in terms of the past. It doesn't seem to occur to people that the next 10 or 20 years might be as good or better than the last 10 or 20. People don't want to take chances on the future, just look wistfully at the past. But I can't think of a person who's failed by betting that the future is going to be as good or better than the present. Time always seems to be on the side of the optimists. Now, there have been short-term disasters for optimists, I'm sure. But over the long haul, like the people who bet on that Los Angeles real estate or hung on to what they owned, most of them did pretty well. I know there are glaring exceptions to this rule. A friend of mine hung on to a lot of stock his family had owned for many years, thinking it had to come back, and it never did. If you don't have the resources to hang on through periods of recession, you can lose your shirt. But still, all in all, time is on the side of the optimists, and there's abundant evidence of it almost everywhere you look. So don't think of opportunity as something you missed in the past. See it as something that is beckoning in the future. The old Roman was right. When a person doesn't know what harbor he's making for, no wind is the right wind. You have to know what you're shooting for to see the opportunity by which we're all surrounded.